Well, thank you for joining us today. Can you give our audience introduction about yourself and a little bit of background?
Yes. Um, so I am Rhonda Sherrod. I grew up in the western suburbs of Chicago, specifically Maywood, and got an extraordinary education at Proviso East High School. That's during Proviso's glory days. And I received a journalism degree from the University of Alabama. Then I went to law school at the University of Texas, practiced law for several years before deciding that that's not really what I wanted to do. And I wanted to do something that would, well, first of all, I love writing. So my journalism degree probably represents my first love. And I decided to go back to school because I wanted to teach specifically at a historically Black college. And I went back, got my doctorate in clinical psychology, taught at two HBCUs, and now I'm back in the city and do some forensic work, therapy, and I also mostly write.
So that leads to the next question. So you just recently published a book, correct? Do you want to
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about that book?
Right. So the book is called Surviving, Healing, and Evolving Essays of Love, Compassion, Healing, and Affirmation for Black People. It's essentially a book about Black women and girls and healing. So I have a trauma background, was sexually abused as a young girl, and have always been interested in healing from a personal perspective. But then I was able to glimpse these patterns of behavior that I recognized immediately in some of my female students, many of whom were just the absolute smartest in the class, but they may have missed classes, turned in assignments late. However, when they turned in papers, they would be heads and shoulders above all the other students. They could think at very complex, high level uh, thought. They were able to engage in good critical thinking, but you might not see them again for another 2 or 3 weeks. I'm assuming because of depression and anxiety. And so I just kind of saw a lot of things that pained me as I was teaching. And I also saw some trauma with my African American males also. So this concept of writing a book, I'm a very private person, never wanted to write anything that had any personal content in it. But I always say I was like Jonah, running from the assignment, but it just would not leave me alone. So ultimately, I wrote the book. The book has been written since 2015. However, I still was dragging, thinking, okay, well, maybe I don't need to put it out. That was therapeutic. It's done, and why publish it? But again, it just wouldn't. I had kept wrestling with this idea that people need this information. So I put it out just this year, 2022, I'm sorry. And I, the book actually runs the gamut. It's in three sections. One section is for myself. It talks about my trauma background and my work through this traumatic series of events. And then the second part of the book is called For My Sisters. And it talks about many of the things that many Black women have to navigate: colorism, um, the denigration of African American women in this society. As we can see right now, President Biden is getting ready to select a eminently qualified African American woman to put on the Supreme Court, and yet you have all this screaming and hollering about whether or not Black people are qualified to be on the court. So it talks about those kinds of things, how Black women can heal from the kind of assaults and injuries that we deal with on a daily basis. And the last part of the book is called For My Community, and it deals with negative stereotypes of Black men and how that affects not only the Black male, but the whole Black family and Black community. Talks about violence and what happens to the children of of murdered children. I'm sorry, the siblings of murdered children. So we have so many children being murdered in our communities, and nobody ever stops to think about the siblings of those murdered children. How then does the brother or the sister of that child negotiate life after that? So just a lot of issues that are of concern for the Black community. So yeah, because when I first started blogging and doing my healing writings, as I call it, they were geared toward Black women, but I heard from so many Black men who back channeled me and said, "Hey, Rhonda, I know you said this is for Black women, but it's helping me also."
So thank you for sharing that. And it definitely sounds like you touched a lot of aspects of trauma and different things in the community. As far as your process for writing the book, I know that it probably wasn't an easy process because you had to recall about your own personal. So if you're open to it, do you want to share a little bit about that? Like the process to writing the book?
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, writing the book was probably easy because I've always been a writer. It's always been my passion. It's always been something that my my family, my professors, everyone always said, "You need to write. You need to write. You need to write." And so, probably I would have written a book anyway. And in fact, I have a couple more books that are going to come out. One is about teaching and healing in that whole education space. Our kids are not learning what they need to learn. There's a cultural war about teaching Black people about their own experience and about teaching the culture about what really happened in this country. And it's very vital, important work. Recall Frederick Douglass said something to the extent, education makes one unfit to be a slave. So this is, I think, a civil rights and human rights issue that I'm writing about, and how important Black people have understood that there's a nexus between education and liberation. So I want to go through all of that. But getting back to your question about the process, writing it was therapeutic. It was liberating in some sense. It's just that, I didn't want to put it out.
And as far as sources of inspiration, are there other writers or other creative sources that you kind of look up to or help you
Oh,
through?
absolutely. So Toni Morrison, just a majestic writer, someone who put words down in such an elegant manner, and whose thought process was so high level. Love reading Toni Morrison books. James Baldwin, Malcolm X. I think the autobiography of Malcolm X is one of the greatest books ever written. And I think, I could name any number of African-American writers, but probably Morrison, James Baldwin, and that book, the autobiography of Malcolm X. And also there's a writer named Ann Petrie that a lot of people may not be familiar with, but she wrote a book called The Street, which is just a classic. You think in terms of Richard Wright, who's also one of my favorite writers, but think in terms of Richard Wright's Black Boy and Native Son. And she wrote a naturalistic book about a Black woman and all of the things that she had to go through, trying to strive and do better for herself and her little boy up in Harlem. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And then I have to check out that book, The Street.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know that the book originally is targeted towards Black women, but you mentioned earlier that Black men found value in it too. Now, I know
Mm-hmm.
that Black men usually either go through trauma or the perpetuators of trauma. So is there a message that you kind of want to share to kind of heal the community that Black men can kind of take responsibility for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I think a lot of pressure is put on males, and particularly Black males, to be strong at all times, to be invulnerable, to be impervious to pain. And it's just not a real way that people can function. We're all human. We all hurt. We all have pain. We all suffer trauma and injuries, psychic wounds, and those wounds have to be attended to. Otherwise, you may think that you've gotten over trauma, but you really haven't. You start living the trauma. So your life starts spilling out in ways that are unfortunate, unhealthy. You start making decisions that are premised upon the whatever it is you're feeling inside, whether it's pain or anger or hurt. All of those things bubble up and come to the surface and spew out in ways that make our lives, make us start living beneath ourselves, make us live lives that, as I say, are beneath our real talents, our real abilities, and put us in situations that are not healthy. So my message to Black men is to attend to those wounds, whether it's, not being your dad not being in your life, or your mom not being in your life, or you suffered some kind of sexual trauma also, because little boys are sexually abused. All of these things, some kind of maybe you applied for a job that you knew you were eminently qualified for, but you didn't get it because of racism and discrimination. These are actual hurts and harms that we have to attend to. And so I definitely, I'm a proponent of therapy, of doing those things that are therapeutic, walks in the park, reading is life sustaining. There's a lot of good literature out there about things that you may be struggling with. You need to go pick it up, read it, or get an audio book. And you need to make connections with people who have value and who can add value to your life. We don't have to live with all this injury and sorrow and pain unattended to. So yeah, that's my message. Black men and Black women have far too much to offer, and are capable of operating at extraordinary levels of brilliance. And we know that because it's already been done. When I was teaching, I used to tell my Black athletes, for example, and I'm thinking about that because of what's going on in the culture, in the news, the lawsuit that was just filed by Brian Flores, I guess you call it, the correct pronunciation of his name. But I used to tell my athletes, when I ask you to be a scholar and an athlete, I'm not asking you to do anything that hasn't already been done. Paul Robeson, Jackie Robinson, there were athletes at Harvard at the turn of the century, and I mean from the 1800s to the 1900s, who were playing baseball and football, and and I would talk to them about these people. So I'm not asking you something that hasn't already been done. You are being told in the culture now that there's some tension between being a scholar and an athlete, but there actually isn't, because it's already been done many, many, many times.
Thank you for sharing that. And I definitely agree with you about that. Two more questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want people to take away from your book when they read it, or your writings in general?
Mm-hmm. And so what I want them to take away is that you have the right to function at your optimal level. And the way you do that is by laying those burdens down, is by attending to that pain. We all become prisoners of our backgrounds if we have trauma and pain in those backgrounds, but we don't have to be prisoners of pain. We can break out of that, and we can do it by accessing therapeutic services. We can access it by, and a lot of people may say, well, I don't have health insurance, I don't have the money to pay for these kinds of things, but you can access these things at community centers, YMCAs. There, and now with the, in the aftermath of George Floyd, people are really understanding of the fact that there's a need for healing across cultures. And so a lot of services are being made available for people who don't have health insurance. So that's not an issue anymore. Even people in private practice are offering services on a sliding scale. So, if you can't pay, then they'll do it pro bono. So get out there and get the services that you need. And most of all, I just want Black people to love themselves. We live in a culture that is constantly assaulting us and injuring us in different ways. And we have to, we have all these cultural aphorisms. You got to keep on trucking. You got to roll with the punches. Never let them see you sweat. Well, all of that is all well and good, as long as you are in the background taking care of yourself.
And then my last question for you is there anything that you want to leave our audience with, like where to purchase your book or anything of that nature?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I do all my work under the banner of She, Surviving, Healing, and Evolving. So you can go to the website, www.survivinghealingandevolving, all, together.com. And you can purchase the book there. I've sent it out. Like I said, it's only been out a couple weeks, and I've sent it out to different people. The reviews have been phenomenal. I'm right now in the process of setting up talks at different Black colleges and different churches for Women's History Month. And also, if you want me to come and speak somewhere, I'd be more than happy to do so. Just get in touch with me. You can contact me through the website and just let me know, and we can talk about it.
Well, thank you.